So the Maduro regime is what's called a cartel, the cartel of the suns. This all began, these investigations have been ongoing for over 10 years independently at the Department of Justice. And one of the things Chavez did in the early 2000s is that most countries have cooperation agreements with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, to stop drug trafficking. South America is a big source of drug trafficking. Why? Because it's mostly produced in Colombia. That's why the U.S. opened military bases there and really fought it hard under the Uribe presidency. And then now under Petro, obviously, it's all gone overboard. But Chavez stopped the cooperation with the U.S. government. And that was purposeful. That's because they thought that was actually their best revenue source. They destroyed the oil industry, so they ran out of oil to steal. What they didn't destroy, because it's not government-owned, is the drug trafficking industry. And so the generals of the Venezuelan military, this is part of how they remain in power, the military is the cartel. And the military knows that if Venezuela were to become a democratic country, obviously, generals cannot be drug kingpins, no matter who comes to power in an election. And that's why they will never give him power peacefully. That's another discussion that we can talk about. But the point is, they became a cartel. They don't mainly produce the drugs there. It's mostly from Colombia, from FARC, ELN, these other military groups. They bring it through Venezuela. And because Venezuela is a narco state, the government itself endorses this. They use government planes to transport drugs. They use all the state infrastructure to do it. Nicolas Maduro's nephews were captured by the DEA in Haiti with kilos of cocaine. They were brought here, they went to trial, they were declared guilty, and then Biden pardoned them and sent them back.
What?
Oh yeah, this happened a few years ago under Biden. It was all part of an exchange for American prisoners. And he released the nephews of the dictator. This is how high up it is. How close do you want to get? It's his own family. So that is why they do it, because it's a big source of revenue. It's a way to create a clientele of people in power that have the weapons to remain in power.
And how much cocaine, do we know how much cocaine is being trafficked from Venezuela to the United States?
So my understanding is that it's about 20% of the cocaine that gets to the United States comes from Venezuela. It's not a majority, but it's a huge portion. And but I don't know how credible it is, the amounts. But it really comes from Colombia. That's where it's produced, and then Venezuela helps with the transportation. Part of it also goes to Europe. It's not all to the United States. Goes through the islands of the Caribbean, sometimes on flights, sometimes on boats, like the boats we've seen they've stricken in the Caribbean, and then ultimately also through Mexico, right?
Well, these boats that have been destroyed by U.S. strikes, are they narco boats? What do we know about them?
I am certain that they are. So one of the things is, right now there's a very lively discussion in the United States over whether this is legal, whether this is good, whether these people need to be brought to trial. Look, I can tell you, at least me personally as a Venezuelan, I fully support the Trump administration's strikes on drug boats in the Caribbean. And the overwhelming majority of Venezuelans even post on their personal social media jokes about it. They love it. They're like, another one bites the dust. Because this is part of what keeps the regime in power. Now, are the strikes going to overthrow Maduro by themselves, striking boats? No. More would need to be done. But is it a good thing because these people are evil and have destroyed our country? Yes.
Well, there was something strange I found because, look, this episode might go out a fair while after the events that we're discussing. And by this point, it might all be legal or illegal or, whatever.
Right.
But I just thought it was quite weird the way the media covered it because they were like, well, one of the people who was hit, was a fisherman. And you're going, well, drug cartels will use fishermen to drive boats.
No, wait. That person, who was, by the way, Colombian, that fisherman, was a convicted armed trafficker in Colombia.
Right.
Are you telling me that he reformed himself, went to a drug trafficking route to fish?
Right.
That sounds fishy.
Well, that sounds fishy. But even if that isn't the case, just because there was one fisherman on a boat doesn't mean it's not a narco boat. Drug cartels probably don't have boat training camps. They just get a guy who has a boat or who knows how to... Do you know what I mean? It's kind of silly.
Now, you might say, well, Daniel, but is death really the solution, right? I'm going to tell you why this is the appropriate strategy. It is the appropriate strategy because the drug trafficking in Latin America, and especially in Venezuela and Colombia, it is tied to terrorism. how do you think FARC and ELN, the terrorist designated groups by the United States, not even talking about the Cartel of the Suns yet?
Sorry, Daniel, there's a lot of people who won't know what FARC is and won't know what ELN is. So let's just give us a bit of background and then come back to the point.
The FARC and ELN are Colombian militias that occupy large portions of Colombia, do bomb attacks, kidnap people. They have kidnapped even presidential candidates in Colombia, and they extort businesses in the region. And they're funded through drug trafficking. How do you think Hezbollah even gets funding too? Hezbollah also receives money from drug trafficking. The terrorist groups have found out that the most profitable way to make money is drug trafficking and another criminal activity. It's like the mob did the alcohol and the prostitution and all these things together. It's the same thing the terrorists do. So when you strike the drug trafficking, you strike the funding source of terrorism.
That's really, really interesting. Another thing I was going to ask you is, one of the things that I think is probably under-discussed is the extent to which Venezuela is working with hostile regimes to the United States.
Absolutely. So Chavez became very good friends with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad when he was president of Iran. The Iranians are still very good allies of their current regime. Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping. I mean, Russia and China gave him billions and billions of loans that then they forgave. That's all to prop them up. Because for these regimes, having Venezuela there is both a platform to attack the United States, but also to bother the United States. They know that the drug trafficking kills Americans and harms the West. Why not support them? They know that Maduro and Chavez before him funded communist parties in other countries, including Petro in Colombia, including Podemos in Spain, by the way, the far left party there that is in power. So it is a very cost-effective way to just fight an asymmetric war against the West. And yeah, so I would say it is a big problem. I don't know if you remember when they tried to kidnap the Iranian dissident here in New York City, these armed assassins. The objective was kidnapping, but the other option was assassination. The plan was actually to take her to Caracas, not to Iran directly. It was much closer. That's because the Iranian regime cooperates with the Maduro regime. The first lady and the president of Iran came recently to Venezuela. It was a really funny video. She came in a full black burqa. And then when she was coming off the plane, Venezuelans put the Star Wars song as she was coming down. Because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And that's the tragedy of Venezuela, is that it's become completely corrupted, that it's essentially now a vessel for the Iranian regime, but it's also got links to China as well.
Well, absolutely. The Chinese supported Chavez with loans. They're still present. I mean, part of how the oil is extracted today in Venezuela is Iranian, Chinese, and Russian companies, because the Maduro regime wasn't able to do it themselves. So they're like, hey, let's bring you all of this. So it's really funny when the far leftists in the United States and other countries say that, oh, this is the United States that wants to overthrow Maduro because of the oil. The oil is being taken by Russia, by China, and by Iran. What are you talking about? Where do you think the Venezuelan gasoline comes from now? It comes from Iran. Take the oil there, bring the gasoline back. The Iranians, those are the imperialist countries that intervened in Venezuela. It's Cuba that did. Venezuelans want to have peaceful, free relations with the United States, like it used to be. The refineries all along Texas used to be designed to bring Venezuelan heavy oil and refine it there. That's what they're designed to do. And if anything, the Maduro regime has destroyed oil production. Venezuela used to produce 3.5 to 4 million barrels a day. Now it produces less than 1 million, about 500,000.
And it represents a very real security threat to the United States. Because I was talking to one of my cousins and he was saying that there's Hezbollah training camps on the island of Margarita.
You see now people in burqas, you see a lot of Islamists in Venezuela. And look, people, you might understand that Muslims are immigrating to rich countries because it's a better place to live. Nobody's immigrating to Venezuela because it's a better place to live. How did they show up there? Because they'll work for Iran. That's really simple. It's because of the Hezbollah training camps. Not only that, but the other terrorist organizations I mentioned earlier, FARC and ELN, sought refuge from the U.S. Involvement in Colombia inside Venezuela. Chavez protected them. He even has, in one of his State of Union addresses, saying that FARC and ELN are not terrorist groups. They're just misunderstood people.
And not only do they represent a terrorist threat externally to the United States, Venezuela, and I'm ashamed to say this, it actually pains me and it upsets me to say this, we represent a threat to the United States internally with gangs like El Tren de Aragua.
Absolutely. So Venezuela then, after 2020, became a different, greater threat to America and the world. Because now not only was it the drugs, which also increased, but it's also the migration of hundreds of thousands of people, well, millions all over the world, of course, and among them, really dangerous gang members that you really didn't need to be a genius to identify them. So one of the examples is this woman who crossed the southern border under Biden. She was not sneaking in. She was let in by Border Patrol. She was checked. You just had to see her picture to know that she shouldn't have been allowed, okay? Facial tattoos everywhere. This woman was actually a child sex trafficker. And when she came to America, what she did was traffic girls into prostitution. Her nickname was Barbie. This is all in the New York Post. You can read it, see her photo. All the other cases in New York City of gang members and thief bands, right? Shoplifting gangs. And that is little. They took over an apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado. I mean, they have done so much havoc. And they have even attempted to assassinate Venezuelan dissidents in other countries. 2 Venezuelan dissidents were almost killed a couple of weeks ago in Colombia by an assassin group. They survived, thank God. They killed one in Chile. Their goal is it's not that most Venezuelans or even a large, or even a small or significant number are all criminals or whatever coming into the US, but that the Venezuelan regime uses the natural migration flow of people who flee them to infiltrate criminals and gang members.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you, because there was one thing that we didn't have in the Soviet Union because it was an authoritarian and maybe even totalitarian regime. We did not have criminal gangs that were roaming, kidnapping people, trafficking drugs. That, like, if you want to talk about the benefits of totalitarianism, crime tends to be really under control, right? As far as I understand, in China, there are no huge gangs that are doing any of this stuff. So how does a country with an authoritarian socialist regime end up having such a strong presence of organized crime?
That is such a good observation, and you're right. Cuba also doesn't have a major crime problem.
Right.
Venezuela is unique among the socialist nations in that it allowed crime to fester. And I think it was a political strategy. So if you see the charts of all the independent groups of the crime rate, homicide rate, kidnapping numbers, everything of Venezuela, Chavez got selected and sworn into office, linear increase up. Caracas became one of the cities with the highest homicide rates in the planet. And that was all during my lifetime. It became so dangerous that when I went to parties as a teenager in friends' homes, we would stay overnight because we didn't want to be picked up or leave in the dark. My own family in the early 2000s were kidnapped in the beach at home. They stole everything. They took our cars, they took our belongings. So this became commonplace. I have friends who, some of them got robbed 2 times a day. Like it became a joke at this point. It's like, really? And like when they come, like they already stole my phone. I can't give it to you. You know? So we became used to the crime. That was one of the greatest quality of life improvements for me coming to America, was being at peace in the street, not thinking that a man in a motorcycle was going to come next to me in the sidewalk and then point a gun at me and say, give me everything you have, and then kill me perhaps.
Yeah, we know how you feel coming from London. I guess what I'm asking is the crime and these gangs that we're seeing, particularly the ones that are infiltrating the United States, is that simply a failure of the Venezuelan regime to assert its authority, or is there something more nefarious going on?
I think it's more nefarious. I think that the other authoritarian regimes chose to just quash crime, and Maduro and Chavez chose not to. Inside Venezuela, the purpose of the gangs was to repress protests. They used these armed groups so that when there were large protests, they would send them. It's called colectivos, collectives. And they would come in motorcycles, dressed in red, and then they would shoot some people, kidnap others, torture them, and diffuse the protest that way. And then say, oh, that wasn't the police. It was them with Russian weapons, by the way. I mean, how else do you get weapons in a country where weapons are illegal, right? Well, the weapons are illegal for the law-abiding citizens, not for the gang members and the collectives. So that's how it all began. And then these gangs also grew on themselves, right? They control the prisons, which are totally packed with people. Part of what President Trump has said about the gangs is that Maduro released the people from the prisons. Actually, the problem is that people just didn't go to prison in the first place. The prisons are actually the place where criminals thrive. They have chicken inside the prisons. They have banks. They bring in people from outside. There are several good documentaries of people who go into the prisons, Americans and others. So I think it was a political strategy at the beginning, internal. And then when they saw that people were coming to the United States through the border, they were like, we can exploit this. So the gang members came with them.
Do you think that there's going to be some kind of military action in Venezuela involving the U.S.?
I hope so. Right now, where we're only seeing is striking the boats. Trump has hinted at striking inside Venezuela, the land. Look, why do I say I hope so? Because it's really the only way we see this regime end. This regime will not end because they feel pressure from sanctions. As much as I support it, because I don't think they should get to enjoy the financial benefits of what they stole. It's the just thing to do, to sanction the regime. If you want to see a prosperous Venezuela where millions of people aren't fleeing, where criminals aren't going to other countries, where we're actually exporting oil instead of exporting people, the only way is for Maduro not to be in power and Venezuela become a free country again.
And I think it's such a good point, Daniel, and what people don't understand, because Venezuela isn't the focus of most people's attention, is this is not sustainable either for Venezuela or actually for the United States, and something really does need to be done.
Indeed. I mean, we're all paying for what socialism did to Venezuela. We're paying it in higher gasoline prices because there are millions of barrels that are not being produced every day from Venezuela. We're all paying it in crime. I mean, how many people have been killed by gang members from Venezuela in the U.S.? Every time I was seeing the news, like migrant crime, whatever, it's up. I was like, please let it not be Venezuelan. Please let it not be Venezuelan. They're like, Venezuelan. Right. Like, oh, please, at least another Latin American nation. Please, come on.
Yeah.
So that is not a coincidence. And so we're paying the price, and we would all benefit so much if Venezuela became free, not just Venezuelans. So many people would go back to Venezuela, millions of people. And I think, so much suffering has been done. People are starving, so much lost human potential of valuable people that could be innovating and doing good things. It's the same thing with the Soviet Union when it was still a socialist regime. How many smart Russians were there? I mean, Russia had some of the smartest people in the world that couldn't fulfill their potential and innovate for all of the world's benefit because of Soviet socialism.
And a lot of them are here now and in Israel.
Very true. Very, very true. But still, it was a loss of human potential.
Of course. Massive.
Same in China. Same in so many authoritarian countries. And I think President Trump has the opportunity not only to get a huge win on foreign policy, but to do the greatest foreign policy achievement of the U.S. perhaps in many decades.
Well, here's a question, Daniel. And look, I think what you're saying, I totally get, particularly from your perspective. I also think, and I think you'd agree with me, over the last 20 years, regime change has got a bit of a bad rep, right? And partly, I think, for very good reasons, which is one of the things I think Americans have discovered that, I always try to explain this to our American friends, is like, not everyone in the world is American. So even if you remove the evil guy at the top, they don't necessarily end up in a, social democracy or liberal democracy or democracy at all. So for example, I think there was a few people who were a little bit too enthusiastic when when Russia invaded Ukraine. And they were like, we just need to get rid of Putin. And I was like, well, I agree with you that what's happening is bad and I'm super pro-Ukraine. You remove Putin, I'm not sure you're going to get something better. So if you're saying, well, it would be better to remove Maduro, I totally get the sentiment. But make the case to me that he's not going to be replaced by Nicolas Maduro and he's even worse.
That's very important. And obviously, during the last 20 years, because of the Iraq War, which was a massive mistake,
right.
$1 trillion mistake, that's a big problem. But people forget that there have been many successful use of forces in U.S. foreign policy in the past, even in Latin America, that led to great prosperity.
Tell us about that.
Panama, for example. Panama today is one of the richest countries in Latin America after the U.S. deposed Manuel Noriega. Grenada. In Grenada, they celebrate Thanksgiving on the day of the U.S. intervention in Grenada. It took 1 day. Now, Grenada is an island. It's much smaller. Panama had the Panama Canal. I understand it's not the same. But what I'm trying to say is that it can be successful. And it has been successful in recent period, in the 80s. So what happens in Venezuela is also similar in that we have a democratically elected government. We have an active opposition, something Cuba doesn't have, unfortunately. And so we have with people, a democratic alternative that has massive popular support. And we have a regime that totally depends on drug trafficking. We don't have a country with ethnic or religious division, right? We're not going to have an Iraq Shiite versus Muslim war. We're not going to have, these ethnic genocides, right, that happen in Africa. It's a very different situation. And we don't need troops on the ground either, right? That would be a massive mistake because it would be very costly, right? The U.S. is simply not capable of doing that in Venezuela, which is a very large country, larger than Iraq, too. So what President Trump could do is actually strike at the military facilities of the regime and even strike at some of the major regime members, such that Maduro gets the message, I need to leave because my life is at risk. And where would he live? The same fate that Bashar al-Assad had. He will go to Russia, probably. I don't think he wants to go to Cuba. It's too poor. So, and China, he probably doesn't want to be in Asia, so he'll probably end up in Russia.